I think sometimes the key aspect to being able to grow a business is finding that great people and accepting that you're not going to find them at the first try. Maybe you'll find them at the third. And it's a difficult process because it means you're hiring somebody, maybe they'll leave a job, come to work for you, and maybe you'll need to like do that 3 more times until you and the other person feel like it's the right fit. That's the kind of the human pain of it. But I think it's important to, figure out when you've hit your own ceiling and when your team is hitting their ceiling and when the company is hitting its ceiling.
Want to know what it takes to start and continue to run a successful business? Look no further than this conversation. I love the fact that Mariana is so honest all the way through this interview. She's very clear on the things that she knows, the things that get in her way, the things that she's had to change along the way to evolve in business. We talk about so much: hiring, the responsibility, and how values plays a big part in winning new business. I hope you get even a slice of the wisdom that I did from this. So let's dive in and enjoy. Okay, so welcome back to Vantage Point Conversations. My name is Colin Parsons, and if you've been here before, you will know I get to ask loads of questions of my guests, people that I would have probably never come across in my corporate days, but I feel very fortunate and grateful that I get to meet all these amazing people. My guest today, Mariana, and I'm going to say Jolles.
Yeah, that's usually a
Okay,
problem.
okay,
Don't be honest, but
okay.
anyway,
Sorry, say that again.
it
Listen,
would be Jolles, the
Jolles.
right
Okay,
the right pronunciation.
that's cool. So I'm all right on first names, surnames. Probably trick me up most of the time. Mariana, I do not introduce my guests. I much prefer them to introduce themselves. Just take as long time as you like, little time, highs, lows, any context that you want, and then we just jump into the conversation from there.
Amazing. Well, this is always a hard question for me. I never know where to begin. But I'm a Uruguayan-born 30-year-old woman. I have been lucky enough to create, build, and maintain Dango, which is an e-commerce agency, and is what I've been dedicating my professional activity for the last about 8 years. I love my friends. I love coffee. I love my books. I paint. I write. So I try to do a lot of things that don't involve screens in my free time. And sometimes I speak too loud. That would be a little bit of a roundup about me.
Fantastic. You went into a lot more detail than some of my guests. That's amazing. I
Okay,
feel
I didn't know
uh,
how much detail
no,
I
it's
should go
perfect. I
into.
love it. A lot of people don't bring in some of those things. So fantastic. So we actually met through a mutual connection, Pedro, who's actually been a live guest here as well. So if Pedro's watching, thank you very much for the introduction. And we spoke, I don't know, well, I want to say about a month ago, maybe a bit longer.
I think
And
so. Yes.
and you were on I want to say a world tour. Maybe that's making it a bit grander than it was, but you were in New York where I saw you, and then you were going to a conference for e-commerce. That's what I
Correct.
remember. Okay.
Correct.
So,
Yes.
and the conference was good because I wanted to actually talk about the speed dating part, because that's the conversation that was
Yeah.
very interesting for me. But actually, in preparation for this conversation, I have a lot of engagement with people across LinkedIn. And I asked them what the sort of a topic that's not really covered in terms of, content, etc. And I've had a lot of feedback really from people saying, oh, rather than theoretical things, people saying, oh, this is nice, actually practical tips and stuff like that. And I was thinking, wow, you're probably going to be a great person to ask, because you've
Okay.
co-founded this business. I remember you said there was something like 15 employees, 14, 15
Yes,
employees.
yes, correct. We're a 17 people team, including my business partner and myself.
So in there, and so there's two of you running the show, and so in a second I'll ask you the questions, but basically that's a lot in terms of running everything, and the sort of weight on your shoulders of doing that, not just finding new business, doing that business, but taking care of everybody. The the thing that I like about my job is it's pretty solo. I don't have to take care of anyone. I have a hard enough time taking care of myself sometimes. So I'm always in awe of people like yourself who've built a company and have employees working with them. So maybe along the way, we'll get into some practical examples or lessons that you've learned to, because that might be useful for the audience. But before we get there, I know nothing about e-commerce. I know nothing about the agency. Can you give me a bit of a understanding of what that is and what the agency part of it does?
Absolutely. I'll do my best. So basically, we're not just an e-commerce agency. We are what is called a Shopify agency. Now, you've probably seen Shopify around. The way that translates to our day-to-day work and the work that we do for clients is we help them from strategy to implementation, get everything in place in order to kind of launch, but most of all, sustain and improve constantly their e-commerce operations, right? And that from our end, there's um, a big part of it that's being a great technology partner. So we help them choose the right technologies, we help them do research, we investigate, we implement, we design, and then we keep it alive, I like to say. And we try and we work together with them to optimize it time and time again. The way we do our work is we work very closely with our clients. I do like to say we build a team with them, and so every case is a little bit different, but it's always around creating and sustaining that e-commerce environment for the brands to be able to run and keep their operations, with e-commerce not being a blocker for them. That's how I like to put it.
And so when we talk about e-commerce, are we talking about physical products? Or are we talking about any digital products?
That's actually a great question. So we do have some cases where we'll work with digital products, but in our case in particular, we work a lot with physical products, right? So think fashion, think art, hobbies, things that you'll get delivered to your door. There is also a world where you have, for example, prints. I think it's a very common example of like a digital product, or you'll have, we've had this case where we work with a client on software licenses. So you have cases that are digital, but I would say 90% of our work is with brands selling physical products.
Okay, because when I hear Shopify, so I've been fascinated by business for a long time.
Yeah.
Me myself, I don't even know that I'm any good at business. I'm stepping into it. I sometimes feel like a bit of an imposter because this is a business. I have created quite a process behind the scenes. But when I've heard about Shopify, etc., oftentimes these things sound super easy. Yeah, just
Hmm.
here you go, tap on a keyboard, you're live within about 3 minutes, good to go. And I think that's a very good selling point for Shopify. But the reality is, in most businesses, there is so many moving parts, so many different things that you don't know that you need to talk to someone. But it's oftentimes it's made to sound like it's super simple. You can do it on your own, couple of clicks, boom, you're done. I don't think it's like that. Where am I on that spectrum? Am I off?
I think it's uh, like a business philosophy question. So the way I see it is, depending on who you are, you might be able to sit down and build something on Shopify. There's 100% a DIY element to it. Shopify started as a very DIY tool. Now it caters to a lot of different business sizes and types. And there's definitely an element of like you might be able to get a good DIY Shopify setup, but then when your business starts growing, and that's usually the type of client that we cater to, is when you start having a lot more moving parts, right? So it's not just about having a store, it's about looking at the data that's coming into your store and analyzing it and making conclusions and plans and actions. And how's your shipment working? And are you getting returns? And how do you integrate with the right chatbot? How do you integrate with the proper email flows? And do you need specific customer data that you need in your email tool to be able to send specific like things start mounting up, right? And the reason why I say it's a little bit of a how do you run your business kind of question is because just like with doing your taxes, do you hire an accountant or do you do them yourself? Do you do everything in your business, or do you try to find great people at the different things that you need to do them? There's always a question of budget, of like what stage a business is at. We know that we're not right for every stage. We know we have identified that we're very right for one type of stage in the lives of our clients. And I think there's different ways of doing things, but it's just a lot of the times you just want to talk to somebody who understands what they're doing and will solve your problems in a great way. It's a very human thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's it, you've really sort of captured my world because so when I started these conversations, it was just going out, um, speaking to people on LinkedIn, seeing if they would reply, and then you start adding systems, then you start adding conversations, then you start adding more software, then you get busy, and then you've got some admin, then you want to make it better, then you want to change software, and so at some point, I was just like, "This is ridiculous." I feel that I'm doing a lot of stuff, but it could be easier. And I, the big thing for me is having a sounding board, someone you can talk to. Just because when you're doing something day to day, often you don't see the blind spots, you don't see the things that you're supposed to be seeing, and and then so I mean, me and Pedro actually work together, and he's really good in sort of saying, look, this is important, this is important, and you go, oh, okay. But there is an ego part in it for me where I go, okay, no, it's my business, like I'm doing it, and then you go, oh, okay. But there is a stage that is just not humanly possible. You can streamline as much as you like, but to grow, you have to go, right, okay, I have to give all of these parts out. And in the beginning, they're very different challenges that you then step into, right? And I guess that's the part where you get into the mix, right?
Yeah, and I think because it happens to me, I sometimes I'll realize we've come to a point where again I have a hand in every single bucket. And there's a saying in Spanish, I wish I could reproduce it, but it basically translates to when you're doing everything, you're doing nothing at all. Because because I I'm the worst. I'm not the best at it. I'm the worst. I sometimes I'll have a hand in everything, and I realize I'm not looking at anything really in depth. And I think it's very hard when you have a business and it's an important part of your life and everything. You sometimes have a hard time letting go, right? And you'll consistently um I think you can hit different kinds of ceilings, right? Sometimes your team capacity will hit a ceiling. And sometimes your, I don't know, like your client number will hit a ceiling. And other times you'll hit your own individual ceiling. And I think that's where the idea of like really doing everything yourself is not always the best strategy. I would say it's I think it's natural to a point, especially when we just start, right? You're starting to build something, you're starting to learn how you want your business to be and things like that. But then it comes a point where um you really, and I'm going through this cycle again myself, and you come to that point where you're like, okay, we've grown again. I'm doing a lot of things in different areas again, and that means my efforts are probably surface level everywhere. And I need great people that do some stuff better than me at a couple of different things. And I think sometimes the key aspect to being able to grow a business is finding that great people and accepting that you're not going to find them at the first try. Maybe you'll find them at the third. And it's a difficult process because it means you're hiring somebody, maybe they'll leave a job, come to work for you, and maybe you'll need to like do that 3 more times until you and the other person feel like it's the right fit, right? So that's the kind of like the human pain of it. But I think it's important to, figure out when you've hit your own ceiling and when your team is hitting their ceiling and when the company is hitting its ceiling.
That's you've said so much in there that I want to dive into. But that awareness, is that a self-awareness, or are you getting that from feedback from your team, your
Ah,
business partner?
I do get a lot of feedback from my business partner. That's definitely something I appreciate about being doing business with somebody, being able to have the conversations. I do still feel like sometimes we're in our own like echo chamber because when you talk to when you're inside the business and you talk to each other, you're seeing things. We have different lenses and different ways of seeing things, but we're still both inside. Um, Sometimes I'll have conversations with friends who have their own businesses who have nothing to do with mine, and that will spark something. Sometimes a client, our clients are really great, and sometimes somebody will like, I don't know, recommend me a book, recommend me an article, or say something that kinds of makes something click. And um and and it comes in waves, to be honest. Like sometimes I'll spend maybe a month or 2 months where I'm not really sure where to go next or what to do. There's always a plan, but there are things that are more, like on the inside. And sometimes somebody will come in and we're having pizza and they'll make a comment about their business and how they change something. And I'll be like, I should be doing that. I do think a lot of the best um, realizations come from the outside. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
And but you have to be very open to receive those. So I would suggest you're a certain type of person, because I've worked in big corporations, I've worked in tiny companies, and ego really gets in the way a lot. It's just like, I've created this, I know best. And at some point you have to let that go. And that's really difficult. And I'm just wondering, have you always been that way, kind of open to sort of get feedback, or you've had to learn it
Um,
through doing business?
no, definitely no. I think I'm sorry, I'm a very honest person, but no. And to this day, if I'm convinced I'm doing something the right way, like when somebody comes in and says I should be doing it differently, my first impulse, like my chemical impulse, will be shut up. But then I I know myself, and I know if I just even if I don't agree with it, I'll listen to it and I'll let a day go by. And when I wake up the next day, maybe I think differently. And I think it's about listening, even if you don't agree. And there's been some people that have taught me a couple of things, and Pedro is one of them. And one of the things that he's taught me, and I think it also helps, is when you're giving advice or when you're giving an opinion about somebody else, be their life or their business, you got to be very careful. First of all, you got to ask if they want an opinion, because, like you said, some people don't want it. And second of all, you got to try to get as much context as possible before you give that opinion. And and I think a lot of people will give advice, and I think we all by default do that, right? We give advice because we think that's what will help the other person and will make it better. But we're in a completely different situation, and maybe we don't know enough about that situation. And I think that that's something that I've started to appreciate when people give me advice in a very like mindful way and in a very um, in good spirits, and trying to give me something that they'll think will be good for me. Sometimes I'll be like, I don't know, maybe you've tried that 4 times and it hasn't worked, but I think you still listen. And honestly, there's also some people whom I have a very high regard for, and that I know will have something interesting to say. Maybe it's not what I need, but they will have something interesting to say. I have friends with their own businesses, a couple of friends that also have their tech businesses. And I think you always learn something. It might not come from what you were expecting, but I think it's the most random conversations where you get the next idea, or like something that, like I was telling you, makes you click. And it's like, I should have been doing this like for the last 3 years and I didn't. And I think it's just about having good conversations.
Yeah, I'd say I'd like to echo the whole point about giving advice, because I don't think I was someone that gave a lot of advice, but when I did give it and people just ignored it, I found that quite hard. But I realized that everybody's in a different situation and everyone's different. They have their own perspective, they have their own lives. And so if they're ready to receive it or it fits for them, great. But I have to be very careful of how I sort of say stuff. And then on the opposite side of that, I think listening is super important, really, really, like, really important. And I also think, mixed in that, people do have an opinion and they do project a lot of things on you, especially when they say, "Oh, you should do this, you should do that," and I I found it hard at some points, because you think you're working very hard, and then someone comes and says something, and they say, "Oh, yeah, but you should be doing that," and you go, "Oh, yeah, maybe." But then I've gone away and I've gone, "Oh, that person doesn't really understand my business. That's what they've been doing elsewhere, and that's a very small part of their world, and it worked for them on the odd occasion, but that's not how things are." And I I've learnt to lean into trusting myself more. And I think that's really important, because in my younger years, I basically looked around and I thought everybody knew much more than me. And I was always like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. But now I'm like, okay, take it on board, listen, absolutely listen, because there might be some wisdom. And if something lands, great. But if it doesn't, you can understand. And I've now found this thing internally, almost like an inner alignment. And I go, oh, okay, if it's not okay, it's not okay. And it's just sorting through all of those things, but understanding that those dynamics are at play. There's projection, there's listening, there's intuition, there's alignment. All of those things do play a part. That's not to say that I have not come across things where people have said, "Yeah, you should be doing that." And I was like, "Yep, should have been doing that." And it feels like a real punch to the face. It's like, "Yeah, I should have been doing that a while ago." But I I I actually look at it now that I enjoy it, because I I've tried to start my own businesses along the way, it never really took off. But this seems to really be something that I've connected with and landed, and yeah, it just seems to be growing, and I'm enjoying it. But I'm very happy about the things that I get wrong now. And I don't know what switched, but it's just like, oh yeah, how cool is it that I didn't get that right? So I used to say that I was streaming to Instagram. And then I think it was only about 3-4 months ago, I realized I needed to click go live in Instagram after I'd done this.
I love
And I
that.
was like, yeah, yeah. And I was like, okay, so it,
Oh my
it
god.
it's just a silly thing, but I can laugh at myself. Nothing's really that serious. Like, and you just go, yeah. And I didn't know that. I kind of just had to work through it. But I'm really glad that I get to work through these things, find it out. But you've mentioned a few times already, it seems that you've got these friends, this network of people around you that are either having their own businesses. That's very smart, but I'm wondering, are they friends that started their own thing, or you found a community, or you networked? How did that come about?
That's an interesting question actually, and and it has more than one answer. So when I I can really relate with what you just said, because when I just started, I think it also had to do a lot with the fact that I was very young, but I felt like I knew nothing. Today, I still feel like I know nothing, and I feel like I'm never going to know anything anyway. So, but I was very um, worried about trying to do things a certain way and reading this business book and listening to this business person who knows a lot and assuming that everybody else knew more about it than myself, about business in general. And I first started looking for, like, you know how there's a couple of different like business owner groups that will get together once a month and things like that. I started trying to join a couple of those, and we would have regular monthly meetings. And I went through a couple of mentors. Some people were very generous. I also, in some cases, felt like, after 3 years of having conversations with these groups or certain people, I was expecting them to give me like the holy grail, right? They know more than me. And at one point, I was kind of like frustrated because I had always been waiting for somebody else to know more about business than me. And, after a couple of years doing something, you know a thing or two. You don't know everything, but there's a thing or two that you know. And I remember the frustration. And I also, at one point, there were friends that I already had, but I was just not having these conversations with them. And I realized I started to uh, invite them for coffee more often, or go grab a drink more often, or go for dinner. And we started having better conversations about, like, and really listening, right? Because you also made a point about listening. And it's, what are you doing? What have you been doing? What's making you worried in your business? Like, what did you change? And people that have a business will usually be excited to talk about it. So I realized that I already had that people in my network, in my friend groups, that had started their own businesses and had interesting things to say. And, to the point of like really looking at others for what to do, and assuming they know more. Um, I think it's also very important to kind of trust yourself, like you said, and leverage what you've got a bit more, and try your instincts, right? If you haven't failed completely yet, there's probably a reason for that. And I think that's an important point. And um the other thing that I've realized is that sometimes you'll have conversations with people and they'll say the same thing to you over and over. And it might not be right for you at that moment or for your business, but maybe 5 years later, you'll think about that again. And that might be the right time. So I think that no conversation is lost, right? There's always a point to sit down and chat. And maybe there's nothing to do from somebody's like advice at one point, but maybe there will be in the future.
Yeah, yeah. It's that whole point about community. I see community as super important. But I've been invited to a few networking things, like business meeting, and I'm not a very sociable person, to be honest. So it's easy for me to say no, but oftentimes it's felt like, oh, you have to pay like a membership to be part of
Mm,
something, and it's like,
yes.
okay, I'm not sure that I'm going to get out what I need. And it sounds
Hmm.
like you more selected the people around you, which I think is super smart, because in these communities and stuff like that, you can get, maybe the same type of people that you are, but you kind of want someone different, or maybe you want people at the same level or same industry, whatever it is. But I think being able to sort of pick and choose some of those things is actually very useful. And I'm still, I think, in terms of mentors and stuff like that, Pedro's mentoring me through stuff as well. And I think it's you really have to resonate with people. You really need them to understand who you are. And again, that comes back to a lot of people will project or give you advice on what they think, but they don't take the time to ask a question about you. And I think that's, for me, that's really important. And that's why Pedro and I started working together, was just, he really got me. Like, he's far beyond other people. He sort of said it, and I was like, how do you know that about me? And I think that's really important, because business is complex. It can be very simple, but it's complex in terms of when you put yourself in it, who you are, how you are. It's not just about the business, because you know business in itself is quite straightforward, but it's how you have that relationship with the business, how involved you are, what the things you like, what you're avoiding, a whole load of things, which is, for me, is the personal element of business more than just the business functions itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's I think anyone who starts a business probably expects or demands a lot from him or herself. I think that's probably a characteristic that we all share. And I think sometimes it's very hard. It's very easy to lose sight of maybe all of the things that you've done well and all of the things that you've actually built, because you're on that never ending, I should be doing this better and I should be doing that better. That's good, because that makes you keep moving, right? But there's some I'm sorry, this is the Will of Pedro live conversation. But again, there's that's a friendship that has taught me a lot about how in depth you gotta listen to somebody before you're able to give something in return. And to your point about the mentors, I I think I've grown to understand what fit really means, right? There'll be people that are great, and you might be great too, but it might just not be the right combination. And you might not be talking to the right person. Like you said, you need someone that I think you need someone that really understands your pain. What's keeping you awake at night? Like, what is it? I remember a couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to have somebody mentor me a little bit. He was the owner of an agency in Nashville, and he very generously shared a couple of things with me. And he'd had his agency for over 20 years. And I'll be very honest, those 3 conversations were a much bigger change in me than some of the longer mentoring relationships I've had. And I think sometimes you try to stick with things because change is not always well perceived in society. It's like, oh no, you change your mind. You only came once and you change your mind. And I think that's one of the things that I promised myself that I'll do more. I'll change my mind more. Because if you sit down with a mentor or somebody on a similar spot and you're trying to have those conversations are going to be about you a lot, not just about the business. And you need to feel like you're resonating. And I think it's hard, just like we were talking earlier. It's like you gotta work to intentionally try and find those connections until there's a feed where both people are winning on both sides.
Yeah, and I think that takes effort and time, but I think when you find those people, you'll know, right? And I think, to your point about changing, I was brought up to be very loyal, and I think that's worked out well sometimes, but it's also been my downfall. So my first job, I worked in a bank for 19 years, and like, for someone who's quite, well, I'm not young anymore, but at the time it was like, why didn't I change? And I felt comfortable. I felt that I owed the company. They'd given me opportunities, etc. And it wasn't like I hated it, but that's 19 years without going to another company. And I was like, okay. And so, a commitment doesn't need to be lifelong anymore. And, if it's not serving you, it's not serving them as well. That's how I kind of see it. So yeah, it's good to change it up. I think, yeah, when it's not right and you're just kind of doing it for loyalty's sake or another reason, right?
You keep going. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's hard to find the sweet spot. You know, you don't want to let go too fast, but you also don't want to find yourself uh we're not trees. We're allowed to move. We're allowed to switch places. We don't have to stay on the place that circumstances chose for us just because. And I remember reading Influence a couple of years ago, and one of the things that it stuck with me is that consistency has a very positive like image in society, right? People, when you're consistent, people will value that positively, and at one point it feels like a punishment, like you need to stay because you should be consistent. But why? And anyway, that's
No, but it's
learning to
that.
live more than learning to do business.
But I was actually thinking about that in business in itself, right? Not just, sort of the working relationships, because I I was um I was posting content daily. I got into I was okay at it, to be honest. It wasn't like I had a massive response rate, but I was pretty good at writing. I was pretty good at putting it out there. And then I started to take some breaks, just some natural stuff, sort of a bit of a pause and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh, okay, what is that content actually giving me? It felt more like a burden than a anything that I was getting back. And yeah, at the beginning, you do a lot of things that just people are doing. You kind of go, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, that sounds about right. So I started posting, and then now I look and I go, yeah, it's you. I think through consistency, you get data, and when you get that data, then you can start making uh, opinions about, okay, is that serving me? Is that not? But without doing it, you don't really know. And I think that's a big challenge in business. So I speak to, well, this is exactly me, but I know there's been people around me that, they start to say, right, okay, well, I need to do this, this, and this, and this. And the reality is you don't. You just need to do one thing, and things won't be perfect when you start, um, especially on posting content. It's this, it's this view that everyone's watching you, but no one is. When I did my first live, I was like, oh yeah, the whole of the internet is watching me.
I love
No,
that.
no, no, no.
The pressure.
Yeah, and I think I thought too much of myself. I was like, "Oh, okay," and then, but that actually is a superpower in many ways when you realise that people aren't watching, because I think we bring a lot of stuff with us, and we're worried about it, and especially stepping away from corporate environment, I felt like, oh, I don't want to piss off people I used to work with or these big companies, etc. It was like, and so it took me a while to find my feet, find my voice, and I'm not sure I'm quite there. I just need to be a bit braver, to be a bit more, not opinionated just for being opinionated, but just say my point and just be okay with that. And yeah, it's one of those things that you think you need all of these things, but it's just about doing it, and then learning. And you don't learn before doing. Does that make sense? And so it's I've
100%.
had to, yeah, I had to teach myself that, because I'm a very logical person, and logic goes into the overthinking part. And then you go, oh yeah, hang on, there's 3 years gone by and I've not made actually a step, and I'm worried about mistakes. But mistakes are the actual learning part, and I've come to realize that they are absolutely okay. They just try it. Most things can be unwound. If they can't, okay, there's a reason why it couldn't be unwound. You're going to learn from that. If something's that, okay, if I do this and everything breaks, something's wrong with the stuff that's going to break. Why is that? So, yeah, I find it fascinating, and but they're all lessons that when you're in it, you don't necessarily realize. You kind of have to step away a little bit to look at it and go, what's actually going on?
Yes. And I think, going back to that ego question that you asked me earlier, uh, I have a very basic operating system in my brain that does not allow for mistakes. It's not just not a possibility. That's not okay. And and I think that is I'm actively trying to change that. But I think that and there's probably tons of people like me, if not everyone. And I think it's so sad that we don't let ourselves fail more. Imagine the like fun or exciting projects that get shelved just because we don't want to fail, right? Because failure is such a horrible thing. And the truth is, nobody will remember. Nobody will, because nobody's looking at you, because nobody cares, because they are looking at themselves and thinking about how the other people is looking at them. So you try to like do this project and it didn't work. So what? I think I've been thinking about that these last couple of weeks actually, and about trying to dare a little more and fail a little more, because you're never going to get the right one if you don't go through the wrong ones. And yes, you'll spend money. Those mistakes will probably have a cost in terms of like time and in terms of money, but how much will you get back from everything you're learning? Because if you don't do it, you're learning zero. You're in the reds, right? You're just losing. Now, if you're trying a thing, two things, three things, uh, one of them is going to stick. And it's really, I think there's something we say in Spanish that is shame doesn't pay the bills, right? And somebody told me that a couple of years ago, because a lot of my work is like commercial and business development and having first conversations with our clients, trying to figure out, okay, can we actually help them? And I've always been really embarrassed to be aggressive and to actively reach out, right? I feel like I don't want to invade people. That's not who I am, blah, blah, blah. And somebody sat me down and told me shame doesn't pay the bills. And shame doesn't pay your team salaries. You do. And the way you do that is getting work for them. And and it is so basic, but I can still feel like the impulse in my brain be like, no, don't do that. Like, no, don't try. No, you're gonna fail. And I think it's something that it's hard, but at least for me, working on changing that is very important, not just to being successful, but to enjoying the things we're doing a little more. It's a shame. It's sad that we don't allow ourselves to try some things because we're so afraid of what Matt in Oregon is going to think about what I wrote on my LinkedIn post. Dude, Matt is walking his dog. He's not looking at your posts. And if he does, then great. Means you're reaching people. Um, and I will also say another thing. There's right now there's a lot of saturation, right? When you go, probably when any of us logs on LinkedIn or Instagram or any social media, you're seeing a lot of things. There's too much information. And I've never been great, for example, at posting every day. But I've realized that at least in my brain and to my business, it's more important to put something out there that is intentional, right? And that it really has our voice and it really has our opinion and it really has something that we think is going to benefit the people that are reading us, which are just like a tiny group of people that will loyally over our emails every month. But it's what can I put out there that will make a difference for somebody? And yeah, maybe you won't be the one that's posting the most or that's talking the most or that's having the most like interviews or whatever your goal is. But I think there's a strong case of like adding value to others and stop contributing to the bloat.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah,
going with the laser, not with the sun.
yeah. That's, I think that's really powerful, and I've heard it from a lot of different sources now that, you know, I think the idea is, you know, people say about posting and they go viral. And I think that's like the dream when you start out and you go, oh, I'm going to go viral and everything's going to be successful. And then quite soon into it, I was like, but what if I was to go viral? What does that mean? Like, am I ready for that? Does that would and the reality is viral doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's just, okay, one day you hit and then you go, then you try and work out why you went viral and then you change yourself so much to try and get that dopamine hit again of going viral. But I've heard from a lot of places that actually people are really looking for those smaller, not the smaller companies, but those with the smaller audience and smaller, um, yeah, sort of connections, because those connections are much more valuable than, you know, someone's got like 2 million followers, etc. Because, someone with 2 million, yeah, however they've got their, is fine. But, if they want to sell a product or want to do something, you got 2 million, but actually those people, maybe they're just for entertainment. They're not there for buying. And so actually a lower volume but deeper connection with clients or audience or whatever it is much more impactful. And that's not to say that posting every day was a bad thing. I think with all of this, you have to go on a journey. You have to try it, because if you didn't know, you wouldn't know. And you don't know what you don't know. And I think you have to start with something. And momentum builds momentum. Yes, you're going to feel like it was a waste of time, but you go, okay, but you work it out. And so I wanted to kind of get back to your business, because I haven't actually asked you how you started. So you and another co-founder. So I'm just assuming at some point it was just the two of you. Is that right?
Yes, well, yeah, it was just, we always had this kind of actually really a funny story. Well, when people say it's a funny story and it's not, maybe it's not, but it makes me laugh. um, we started with a developer. We had one developer, and we were the two of us and him, and we were actively we wanted to hire in South America for a couple of different reasons. For like cultural closeness, because we were in the same time zone. So lots of like practical reasons. And I remember we found somebody in Argentina, and he seemed great. And we do the interview, and that was our first hire. We do the interview, and that was amazing. And when we're about to wrap up, I asked him, by the way, where are you based? And he says, in the Philippines. The thing is, this was COVID time, and he was stuck there because he couldn't, at that point, I think Argentina was not helping their citizens come back in. And so I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare. And he was great. He's to this day somebody I adore, and he's a brilliant person. But yes, to answer your question, it was just the two of us, and at first we slowly started to hire contractors, right? Like everybody else. We just had people, and we would have them for a couple of hours every week. And then the thing is that COVID hit. And when COVID hit, um, everybody needed an e-commerce agency. And the thing is that before e-commerce, a lot of people didn't, a lot of software development companies or agencies didn't want to touch e-commerce. It was like, nah, like, why would we do this when we could be building apps for startups that can burn through cash without even minding it? And so we would just get like other agencies or companies pass on their e-commerce work to us. And then this was 2018, the end of 2018, 2019. And then COVID hits, and people are desperate because anyone anyone who had a physical operation and had been neglecting their e-commerce suddenly had to move. I remember that at first we needed to convince people to actually invest in e-commerce, and I remember that was very tiring for me. It was very frustrating because I I was probably not communicating me well myself, but I was like, how can they see this? Like, why don't they see how important this is? And then things change, right? And you were getting calls from people. I remember we were working from 7 a.m. till midnight. And because the thing is, this wasn't about making more money. It was about people feeling like they were going to have to close their businesses or fire people in their team or lose their own jobs. So you were getting those types of calls. And in our world, that's you always pick up the phone for those types of calls. And so we were working like crazy. And then that was a couple of months. Things started getting back to normal. But really, the pandemic was kind of the thing that helped us and lifted us up. Besides, in spite of it being like this horrible event for e-commerce, I think probably for every e-commerce agency out there, it kind of made companies shift gears and change how they work. And I think those effects are still in place today, right? People, because consumer habits really finalized their change there, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's it it's really strange when you said that you made your first hire and that felt great. I had this inner feeling. I was like, "Oh, I have to hire someone." And I'm just thinking more of the admin than anything else and the responsibility of it. But
Yes.
how you you felt great. Why did you feel great? Because of the person coming on board, the fact that they could solve a problem in your company, or that you felt that you were growing, all of the above? None of those? Where did that land?
Um, well, to be honest with you, at that point, I was scared out of my mind because I hired him on a Saturday and we had a project starting on Monday that needed him. And yes, I wanted to die. I don't think that was a great weekend for me. Um, but the thing is that I think it takes getting one right. And I was really lucky. I had no idea what I was doing back then. And this hire, I actually talked to him yesterday because we're friends now. And he just brought such brilliancy, but not just in the like logical technolo- technical aspect of it. He had so many things to say, and all of them were really valuable. I honestly felt like I didn't deserve him. I felt like we'd found somebody he was too good for me. Like 100%, he was too good for me. And so I think that was kind of like, he was also a great like cultural fit with us and with the people that we eventually ended up hiring. And I think that's very important because there's a part that's coding or doing whatever your business like base is. But then there's a part of like how you talk to the other people in your team, how you talk to your clients, how you care for somebody else's business, and how you give recommendations, what we were just saying, and how you're really mindful of everything there. And and he did all that very well. And it will always make me nervous. I was actually kind of like uh uh, kicking myself in the gut for this a couple of days ago because I was like, I should be hiring more. And to this day, I'm still very wary of like the responsibility it means to bring somebody else into your team, right? And to ask that person to maybe leave another job for you, and to everything that means. It's not just about the money and paying somebody, but it's also about like you're gonna become a very important a very important thing in this person's life. So that for me will always be scary. But at the same point, I'm trying to, again, change my mind, kind of like retrain my brain to the fact that when you get great people, you do great work. And when you do great work, you get great clients. It's very simple. And there's things in between, blah, 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 blah. But growing without a great team, that's not something that's going to happen. And while until for as long as I want to keep growing, I will need to be getting that great people. And really, when you see great people come in and make changes and give valuable opinions and add value and care about things, I think that's when you kind of like start retraining your brain as to what hiring means.
I love the perspective of that, and I think the bit that scares me is that the fact that you will be a part of their life. You know, you're going to change them. You're in terms of you're going to employ them. You're going to give them a salary, etc. And I think that feels like having a child in some weird way. It's just
Reply to that when we're offline, but yes. No, but yes, but there's a responsibility there. You choose how you, I think you choose how much you care about that. But there's definitely a responsibility in there if you ask me.
yeah. And something you've kind of said throughout this that I'm taking, you know, when you start any of these things, you know, you're not prepared for all of these. You know, life might have given you different perspectives on life and how things are. But I think when you go through these milestones or gateways or whatever you want to call them, you kind of have to change your perspective in order for that to be okay, and you know, and to actually, you know, maybe increase the size of your company. And you know, I know, you know, in banks we often talk about risk. You know, oh, you got to be risk, or you got to be risk averse. And the um the thing that we never really talk about is, you know, the risk of not doing it. You know, we go, oh, these are all the risks of doing it, but actually, what's the risk of not doing it? And that's hard oftentimes because you don't know what you don't know. But you go, right, okay, we want to do this. We don't know where it's going to take us. But again, in your hiring, when you explained that, when you saw those people come in, the dynamic, you know, based on a short interview, even if you get someone to come in and stuff like that, you have no idea, right? That's still a sort of gamble on someone to say it. But then when you see them, you go, oh wow, they brought so much. And I think that that element of hiring the right people is so important. And it kind of comes back to that point of how do you actually do that? Because you said that you're across so many things, and you said about hiring, like, but hiring is, you know, I don't know how often you have to hire, but it is a full-time job in most ways. You know, you've got to contact these people, build relationships, interview, you know, bring them in, have interviews with other people, make sure they fit, works there, a whole load of things. So that in itself is a big part, right? How much does that take up in your day-to-day life?
That's that's the right insight. Hiring used to be, I would say, probably the biggest like time eater in what we do. I am lucky in the fact that my partner takes care of most of the hiring. Go to the last interview, I smile and make sure I think they're nice people. Uh, so I'm very grateful for that, because my partner goes through that. But when we were doing it completely in house, it was insane. It was insane. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of time from our hands, and it's a full time job, like you said. And over the years, we went through, I would say, about three different recruiters until we found one that actually does um, great work, honestly, and that knows our industry very well. And I think that's key because we went through a couple of recruiters that I'm sure that they do great work. I have nothing bad to say about their work, but it was just not working for our company and for our business model. And we ended up with I don't remember how we found them. I think they reached out directly and we agreed to a meeting. So, point for cold emailing. And we ended up we've been working with them for a long time and they're great. And obviously, there's still a big part that we need to do in house because we need to check that it's a cultural fit. We need to check that for the technical kind of things that we do, they're prepared. And my business partner puts a lot of that on his shoulders. But it's decreased significantly in terms of the effort that we need to do from the moment that we got a recruiter. But I won't lie, I think that making sure you're finding the right people is probably the most important, one of the most important things you can do as a business owner. Because, like, what else is most important? Than finding people that can do a great job, at great work in the things that you cannot or that you don't have enough time to look at. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I do think that building a great team is probably the key to the castle.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. It's again, having worked at different companies, it's quite amazing how different companies approach hiring. Some just go, yeah, we'll just hire, hire, hire. They don't really put a lot of uh, effort into it. And I remember one job I had, basically, there was a new hire. No one knew about him. And I was told Monday morning, oh yeah, we've got this new guy. He's in the kitchen area. I was like, so when are they starting? And they went, no, no, they're starting today. Like, the lead time to hiring someone back then was easy a month, if not a couple of months. And you've told me the morning that they've turned up, didn't know who they were, what they were doing, or anything. I was like, that's just absolutely like bizarre. And so no one had met this person, and it was really sad for this guy because I think he also felt like, so we all kind of went for a little team meeting. You know, we were only in a small department at the time, and we're like, I don't know anything about you, who you are, and we're going to be working together. And the whole principle, like, work is such a big part of our lives. We give a certain amount of hours at least, but you're trying to put people together, and yet you go, yeah, basically you're all together and you're all going to fit. And there was no consideration to this guy, what his needs were or anything. I was just like, man, this is like, and yes, it works out sometimes, but that's more luck than anything else. But I think, like you said, the the key to the castle is that good hiring, those people that, maybe are, and they don't all need to be superstars. And something that I've realized is that oftentimes for jobs, people hire for specifics like, oh, they're good at this coding or doing this and this. They don't oftentimes you can have a great performing team that are all technically very capable. You just need one person in there who just is able just to navigate freely between personalities, understand, connect, communicate, but they're not like a project manager. They're just this person. And that one person may not be, this thing on this CV, but when you get them in, man, you can just change a team because of that. And it's often the thing that's overlooked, and it's the personality, the traits, the things that you don't really put on a CV because you wouldn't put them on a CV. But if you've done your job correctly, you understand what the team is lacking, or you have a good inclination of what that is. You've spoken to your team, and then you can bring that person in. And if you do it well and you understand people, that's amazing. You can really take a great team into, fantastic or extraordinarily great team.
100%. Yeah. I think in our industry that happens a lot, right? You go through a very technical hiring process, but then it takes one person not being as kind or some other trait as the rest of your team to kind of break the harmony that you have. Well, for us, we're fully remote, and sometimes I'll be honest. Sometimes we're hiring and we're pressured to get somebody in, and I'll be like, "Oh my god, we didn't do like a full proper introduction of this person," and it feels bad. It feels really bad. But I gotta confess, I've done it before, and remote. I think it's like twice as hard because you're like you gotta get in there, everyone in there for a call and like coordinate. And it's not like you're next to each other and you can do like an intro or a welcoming. And I think that's also a little bit uh, of a challenge.
Yeah. So I want to switch. I'm conscious of time. I'll kind of sort of make this the last thing, but when we had our conversation before this live, you were on your way to Vegas and to do a conference for
Correct.
not to run the conference, but to go and attend it. It was for e-commerce, and you talked to me. I I don't know if this is what I took away. It was like speed dating for business. And, it was basically, you said you you have like this phone book of like people and you get to pick them out and then you have to go speed dating for, I can't remember
100%.
how
Yeah.
long. How was it? Is it a good way of doing business? What did you learn from that? Is it a good thing to do?
Okay. Yes. So it was a retail conference, and the reason why I mentioned this is because I've been to a couple of events by now, and for me, they have always been more technology oriented events, and I think that's an important difference here. Now, obviously, nowadays at a retail conference, 90% of the conversations are technology. There's probably only 10% that's not. But I was kind of a friend I made there described it as beautiful madness, which I think it's a great it's a great description. Mm, I was actually surprised about a couple of different things. I think that I was very surprised, in particular with the like speed dating, of how companies and brands would actually take the time to sit down and talk to me, and they were actively looking for providers. They weren't just there to network, right? And so these are called meetups. So the event is called Shop Talk, and the kind of speed dating event are the meetups. And I was really surprised of that, of how many people were actively seeking to for providers for their brands or their companies. I could feel they were really trying to kind of understand if you're a person they could work with, because we didn't talk business. That's the truth. We kind of met each other, we connected with each other, and we discussed some topics that are relevant in the industry right now. Everybody's discussing AI and what's going to happen. Some of them would discuss their pains and things that, nightmares they've had with previous agencies. That's a very common topic of conversation. When you're an agency, you're like the new boyfriend trying to be the new boyfriend, but they've gotten their hearts broken a couple of times. So you gotta work to gain a trust that you never lost to begin with. Um, but I think that's the thing. Like, people, you can sit down and Google e-commerce agencies, and you'll get 1,000 right in front of you. But I think, or at least in my experience, I felt like people were really craving the face-to-face conversation, and especially right now, I think people want to work with people, and they want to work with people they feel they can trust, and they feel have their backs. And then we can get into the details and discuss how you do business, how I do business, how we operate, how we work, how we onboard, anything that you want to discuss. But I feel like a lot of people were just there trying to kind of get the human sense from providers. And I found that very interesting, because in the previous events that I've been to, that's not always been the case. There's not always people that are really interested in building a relationship with you and seeing, okay, what can we do together? So that was very interesting, and it was also very fun.
What do you attribute to the shift? Why different now?
I I can't say for sure. I'll be honest. It's the first time I go, but this event was celebrating 10 years, and I realized, as I got to the floor, I could see people, walking towards each other and hugging each other. And I kind of like quickly realized that there's people here that have been coming for maybe not 10, but maybe 7 or maybe 4 years. And I think there's a point of like creating and sustaining those relationships, and that at least in this environment, people are used to coming back and talk to each other about their problems and what they need. What we were saying earlier, they talk to their network about what they need and what's hurting them, and then somebody will introduce you to somebody, and you'll have a beer with somebody that it's doing this cool thing, and that will maybe at one point spun into something interesting for everyone. Um, but I think people are probably tired of Googling or asking LLMs for things. And there's a lot of things that you can solve with the internet. I can be talking to you right now, but you can't solve trust.
Mm, yeah. It's
That's my take.
it kind of aligns with. So I never thought these conversations were going to take off. Like long form, people told me to do short form, and and I was like, okay, but something told me that yeah, just to lean in and do it. And it takes a lot of time and effort, but I think it's the trust that you build through conversations and the fact that they're unscripted. You know, it's not me sitting there asking the same questions over and over again. It's really a back and forth, and it, you know, I have no idea where we're going to go. I might have an idea, but that builds trust. It builds relationships. And I started to see that there is a big sort of uptick in people watching these things and sort of paying attention. And I was like, oh, I think in the world of AI, you know, remote working, etc., you know, those things can be great, but we all need that human connection. We do need to trust, know, like, and trust, they always say. And I think we are missing that because we are kind of becoming a bit more selfish. We just think insular rather than anything else. So, yeah, I start to see things shifting. There is a need for that sort of engagement. Even though this is done virtually, I do feel that people come in and listen because they want that genuine real life thing. And, you know, you've been super honest about everything, which is amazing because, you know, a lot of the time people
Now I'm
not on.
worried. Have I been too honest?
No, no, it's I think it's fantastic because the fact that you can be honest is something amazing because you know often in you know I can talk about banks, you know, there's this like very sort of structured serious way about it, but behind the scenes it can be chaos, but that's never shared. And I think, you know, I started this conversation through, you know, saying that people have wanted, I said, what are people not talking about on LinkedIn? And it's the real honest side of things, because I think there's two schools. Basically, you've got these people that are showing the perfect, I've got all the answers, etc. And then there's people going, oh, my day's the worst and it's negative and it's looking for attention. The reality is there's this lovely sweet spot in between where people are very honest and open, very trusting and go, yeah, shit goes wrong. Like, but I'm here, I've got this. But that's the thing, you're all learning. And, you know, people that say, I've got it all worked out, generally haven't. They're trying to sell you something that they've never done themselves. Whereas you come along and you are very open and honest about all of those things. And that is human. And I think that is what we're missing from so much of work. I really, really do.
Well, thank you for that. Now I'm embarrassed.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I always, back to Shock Top and the meetups. I Out of one of all of the meetings that I had, I was sitting with this woman. She was incredibly funny. And she was also very like accurate and very explicit as to what her problems were and what she needed. And we had a great conversation. And as we're wrapping up, she's the only person that asked me what makes you different. And I say that we care. I can also tell you that like we have great processes or quality controls or like a lot of different things that we care about. But that's all gets summed up into the fact that we care. And because we care, we'll worry about picking up the phone for you and making the best recommendations we can for you and bringing, I don't know, like the latest tech for you or like everything that's relevant in our business, right? But the bottom line is we know you're a person, we know you want to do something great or build a great team or build a great e-com or build a great business. And we're here to support you through that. And it might sound like sometimes I worry that that sounds like childish or simple or like empty, but it's the truth. It's when you come through the door later, you'll see that our team is going to be answering you and it's going to be actively finding being curious and finding great stuff to do for your business. And I think that's the whole spirit behind it. And then you can get nitpicky about like processes, and do you use Asana or do you use Trello or do you use Jira, and like you can go into all that, but that's not what's going to hit your bottom line at the end of the day, and that's not what's going to change. I think also like how you work on a day-to-day basis and how you live consequentially, because we put so much time into work that it would be a lie to say it doesn't impact how you're living.
And I was just wondering that because you've talked a lot about that, so I'll make it the last questions because I
Yeah.
realize that we're running over. But when you started the company, did you have these founding principles and values, or you worked them out through time, or your clients help you shape them? How did that come about?
Well, I think, and there's a great article I read about values a long time ago on a magazine, and it said something that I realized, at least in our case, it's true, and it's that usually the company's values are shaped by the founder's values. In this case, my business partner and myself, and we're lucky enough that we can disagree on a lot of things, but we share kind of like foundational or like core values, right? And I think that's something that at the beginning was not intentional. It just kind of like, stemmed off from what we thought or how we acted or how we talked to people. And and a couple of years later, we sat down and actually like wrote it down, and actually started to think about like purpose and values actively. But I think values are not something you can make. It's something that comes down from who you are into your organization. Unless you have like a 50 people board and you're very far detached from your business, I think that's what's going to happen. Is who you are as a person is going to shape the type of business you have and the type of people you bring into it.
I think that is a perfect sentence to roll out because um, basically, I know there's a lot of people that are starting businesses, etc., and what makes them different, etc. But having these type of values, like you say, there's loads of e-commerce agencies, and it's not just saying the buzzwords. Like throughout this conversation, I've really got the fact that you live and breathe, very honest about and very open about it. But these are core things that are super important to you. And it's not that you're trying to do an advertisement. It's literally who you are and how your company is run. And I think that's super important. And that can be the differentiator in business. And I think, having those conversations, like you say, the other stuff is just technical detail that's kind of not immaterial. Some things are important, but how you do business is much, much deeper. And I think that those business relationships are really important. And, we often, we sort of skip past that. And I know I've worked for a lot of companies that use, a lot of the buzzwords for all of their values and put them on their website. The fact is you get in that company, not one of those stands up to, it's just, yeah, it sounds good and looks good on promotional stuff, but the fact that you're actually living and breathing it, I think says so much about you and your company.
Thank you. For me, it's just, I don't think I do anything different in my business that I would do in my life. And I think for me, that's the best like solution at the moment. And there's going to be people that because of that will want to work with us, and there's going to be people that won't want to work with us. And that's totally fine, because we all have different interests and different things we care about. And I think it honestly, I think it doesn't just impact teams, but I think it also impacts who you're working for. In our case, our clients. I think people are going to choose you also based on whether you match their own set of values. And you're not gonna, I don't think you're going to sit down and discuss your values, but I think you're going to sit down and they're going to look at how you talk to them and what you tell them and how do you address them. And I think they're going to make they're going to get their own conclusions from these. And they're also going to look at like your website and how many budgets you have, but nobody's going to hire you for that.
Yeah, I agree. So for today, thank you very much. Obviously, I found you on LinkedIn via Pedro, who has his name's popped up. So
Kudos
we
to
say,
Pedro.
yeah, his ears must be burning somewhere.
Gotta
So,
be one.
so, but where should people find you? Is it a website? Is it LinkedIn? Any other place? Where's the best place for people to find? And if they want to know more about you, the company, or an e-commerce agency?
They definitely can find me on LinkedIn. I will take 3 days to answer. Sorry about that. That's just who I am. But then they can also find us at dango.digital, and that will get an email right through me, and that I will answer in time. uh,
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for having me, Colin. Truly,
This is a
truly
pleasure.
enjoyed our conversation.
You were honest right up until the end bit about not answering your emails. I love that. I love that about you. So, Mariana, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. It really sort of teased something out in terms of understanding business. I love the way that you're approaching it, and the way that you think about things, and the awareness that you have. So it's been a real pleasure, and thank you very much for giving me your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you setting this up.
Okay, lovely. Take care.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
If you like this conversation today, I do these 2 to 3 times a week, and they're always over subjects that I either know something about, a little bit, or nothing about. So come with me on the journey. By clicking subscribe and clicking on the bell notification, you'll be informed of new episodes. As I say, these are 2 to 3 a week now. And yeah, I hope you enjoy them. If there's any feedback or comments that you want to add, any questions, you might want something of a returning guest. Maybe you've got questions or things that you want to know about. If there's guests that you want me to invite on, please let me know. I'd appreciate the feedback. That's it. Thanks for your time.